It was at first thought that a Canadian flight attendant was patient 0, and his name was Eitan Degas, I think. And they thought that he was the one that bought HIV here, when we found that that wasn't true later on. Actually, there was a young man, and I believe he's African American or Caribbean American, and I believe it's in Missouri. And this young man was very, very young. He passed away. He kept getting viruses and illnesses, and the doctors had no idea what to do. They were like, what the heck? And they found out that when thank goodness they took tissue samples, and they found the virus in his system. And this is back in 1960 something.
My understanding of the HIV virus was actually discovered back in the late 60s, early 70s, between 1969 and 1971.
For me, I remember, like, I grew up in the 80s, and I remember hearing about it in the 80s, you know, in the newspapers, and it was this horrendous disease that caused all these horrible side effects. And obviously this was true. This was what was happening to people dying of AIDS in the 80s. I know it started well, there was a big influx of it in San Francisco and New York in the 80s, and then in Paris as well, I think.
What's interesting is we think of HIV as being something that just came up recently, like in the 80s but it's been around for years and years and years. So it's that's also fascinating to me, that it's just been in our consciousness for the last 30 or so years.
The issue: who really discovered the AIDS virus, and did the Americans steal the credit from the French? No one disputes that researchers at the Pasteur Institute discovered a virus 3 years ago, but did they know what they had? Whatever they had, they let scientists at the National Institutes of Health have a sample for study, and shortly after that, the Americans held a press conference.
The probable cause of AIDS has been found.
That announcement infuriated the French, who say they had already found the cause of AIDS.
There was no press, there was no people. We did not announce that we find the virus, we are working.
Whatever promise the AIDS drug holds, the disease itself presents a clear and present danger to humanity. Nowhere is the toll more widespread than in some African nations. In Uganda, there are sights of despair reminiscent of the vivid pictures from the famine in Ethiopia.
It was at first thought that a Canadian flight attendant was patient 0, and his name was Eitan Degas, I think. And they thought that he was the one that bought HIV here, when we found that that wasn't true later on.
You can't get AIDS like this. You can't get AIDS from hugging and kissing.
But if you can believe it or not, in the year 2018, it still exists. There are people that say, "Ooh, you have HIV. How dare you? You're so nasty."
Well, there's PrEP, which I don't know about here in the States, but in the UK has kind of really taken off in the last 12 months. You know, it's so there's PrEP, there's condoms.
I do get pains in my stomach sometimes, but like I know that usually if I drink a lot of water, it goes away.
I don't really have any side effects from HIV. I tend to get tired, and I sometimes have night sweats.
So imagine you're waking up in the middle of the night and your body does not work because of the drugs that are supposed to save your life.
It's a weird thing. Medications, sometimes having to take a medication makes you feel sicker. So that's just a weird mind fuck.
I've also asked HHS to add the AIDS virus to the list of contagious diseases for which immigrants and aliens seeking permanent residence in the United States can be denied entry.
It's hard to get people to change their minds about what HIV looks like in a modern world when those images are so vivid still in our memories. And so those kinds of policies, even though they're outdated and old-fashioned, people still think they're important, and that's why it's so hard to get policies like a travel ban or HIV criminalization or anything like that to change, because people are still so frightened from 30 years ago.
This spirit of mine, this spirit of mine, this spirit of mine, this spirit of mine. You can say what you want to, and you can say what you will. This spirit of mine, not even HIV can kill. I've had
22 years ago, in a decision rooted in fear rather than fact, the United States instituted a travel ban on entry into the country for people living with HIV/AIDS. Now, we talk about reducing the stigma of this disease, yet we've treated a visitor living with it as a threat.
Here's the thing about religion and modern medicine. Yes, God does exist. Yes, God does do all sorts of miracles. A few things that God did give us as humans, He gave us common sense.
HIV, I dare you to come at me as you will, but this spirit of mine, not even you can heal. So say what you want to and think what you will. HIV, this spirit of mine will never kill. This spirit of mine.
But I always say, like, it's not like it's an easy thing to get. Like, you can't get it from a toilet seat, you can't get it from hugging somebody, you can't get it from saliva. You get it basically from blood, from like blood transference. And that's where like the HIV lives and thrives.
People can get HIV by having unprotected sex.
The chances of them getting the virus is very, very, very low because I'm undetectable.
The risk of transference is negligible. It is practically zero. It is so small as to be non-important. Use condoms. Condoms are still effective. They're not 100% effective, but they're an effective tool.
I do go to the gym. It's therapeutic to go to the gym.
Okay.
You ready?
Ready.
Okay.